The silence between Yusa journey of love, vulnerability, and growth. We've all heard the expression opposites attract, but no one ever mentioned the cost. I was never one in Anna. Someone who completely shattered that theory and turned my world upside down. I met her on an ordinary Thursday. I wasn't expecting anything to change that day, but there she was, in the coffee shop I frequented. She had an air of mystery about her, an aura that made it impossible not to notice her. Her dark, curly hair framed her face perfectly, and her eyes, an almost mesmerizing shade of brown, seemed to see right through me. The first thing I noticed, however, was the way she walked. It was confident, deliberate, but there was something else, something quieter, a soft vulnerability hiding beneath the surface. She didn't see me at first, but when she did, it was as if time slowed down. I remember the way she smiled, the corners of her lips turning upward just slightly. It wasn't the kind of smile that screamed for attention, but one that invited curiosity. I couldn't look away. I'd been in relationships before, sure, but none that made me feel like this. Like I wanted to know everything about her, even before we exchanged a single word. To believe in the idea of love at first sight or grand romantic gestures. To me, relationships had always been about understanding, compromise, and finding someone who fits into the rhythm of your life. Then came, it wasn't an easy conversation. Anna wasn't the type to indulge in small talk, and I wasn't the type to push for more than the surface-level pleasantries, but we spoke slowly, awkwardly, as strangers do. At first, it was about the coffee, the weather, the kind of books we liked to read. But beneath the words, something electric was crackling in the air. There was a tension, an unspoken understanding that neither of us could deny. It wasn't love at first sight. It wasn't anything like what I'd imagined, but it was undeniable. We began talking more, meeting in that same coffee shop, sharing little moments of our lives with each other. She would tell me about her job as a graphic designer, how she loved the creativity it allowed but hated the routine that came with it. I, on the other hand, worked in finance, predictable, structured, and in some ways, stifling. Our worlds couldn't have been more different, but in that difference, something began to flourish, but there was always a distance between us. At first, it was small, just the little things. The way she wouldn't return my texts immediately, or how she'd cancel plans at the last minute. But I told myself it was normal. People are busy, right? It's nothing to worry about. Except it started to eat at me. Every time we met, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She was distant, emotionally unavailable, like she was constantly holding herself back from getting too close. But I couldn't help it. I kept coming back. There was something magnetic about her, something that made me want to understand her, to figure out why she couldn't fully open up. I wanted to break through her walls, to help her, to make her feel safe enough to trust me. It wasn't long before our relationship turned into a game of cat and mouse. I would push, and she would pull away. There were moments when I felt like we were so close, just one step away from really understanding each other. And then there were times when I felt completely invisible to her, like I was just another person passing through her life. And the worst part was, I never knew where I stood. She'd give me just enough to keep me hanging on, but never enough to let me in completely. I remember one night, sitting across from her at our usual coffee shop, watching the rain fall outside. The world seemed quiet, and for once, it felt like we were alone in our bubble. But even then, there was an undercurrent of tension, a silence between us that spoke volumes. It was almost suffocating. I wanted to reach out, to tell her how I felt, to ask her what was going on, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. She was the first one to break the silence. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I thought she was talking about us, about our relationship. But when I looked at her, I saw a deep sadness in her eyes, something that had nothing to do with me. It was as if she was battling some inner turmoil, something she couldn't or wouldn't share. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her feel better, to make her see that I was there for her. But I didn't know how. All I could do was sit there, frozen in the moment, watching her struggle with something she couldn't put into words. And then she stood up, leaving me sitting there alone with my thoughts. No explanation, no goodbye. Just the faint click of the door as it shut behind her. That night, I felt the silence between us more than I ever had before. It was a silence that wasn't just about the words left unsaid. It was about everything that had been left unspoken, the things we both chose not to address. I couldn't help but wonder if we were both too afraid to face the truth. Maybe she was afraid to let someone in, to let someone see the parts of her she kept hidden. And maybe I was afraid that, despite everything, I wasn't enough to break down the walls she had built around herself. It wasn't until the next day, when she texted me apologizing for leaving so abruptly, that I realized how deeply I had fallen for her. It wasn't the kind of love that's easy to define. It wasn't the perfect, fairy tale kind of love that I had always imagined. It was messy, complicated, and filled with unspoken words. But it was real. And somehow, that made it even more terrifying. The silence between us wasn't just about distance. It was about the space we had created for ourselves. A space that neither of us seemed willing to leave. But deep down, I knew that if we were ever going to make this work, we would have to confront that silence. We would have to face the truth about what we both wanted and whether we were brave enough to truly let each other in. But for now, all I could do was wait. Wait for her to break the silence, or for me to find the courage to speak first. The days that followed were filled with a peculiar sense of uncertainty. Anna's message lingered in my mind like a ghost, haunting every corner of my thoughts. She had apologized for leaving so abruptly, but her apology didn't feel like the end. It felt like an invitation to something deeper, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I responded, of course. I could not respond. That would be too final, too cold, and I wasn't ready to let her go. Not yet. We agreed to meet again, but even as I sent the text, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of a precipice. The conversation we had started the night she left, the one about what we were doing, seemed to be unresolved, like a thread left hanging. When we met again, it was in the same coffee shop. The familiarity of the place should have been comforting, but instead it felt heavy, like we were stepping back into the same cycle of avoidance and unsaid words. I was still trying to figure out what had changed between us. The Anna I had met a few weeks ago, the one who smiled softly, who shared little details about her life and laughed like nothing mattered, was gone. In her place was someone who seemed guarded, distracted, like she was carrying a weight that she couldn't shake off. "I'm sorry again," she started before I could even say hello. She spoke quietly, almost as if she were apologizing for more than just leaving the night before. There was something in her tone that made my chest tighten, a quiet vulnerability that I hadn't heard from her before. "I don't know why I left like that. It's just, I've been feeling so confused." Her words hung in the air between us, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that I understood. But the truth was, I didn't understand at all. I didn't know why she had been so distant, why she kept pulling away when I was trying to get closer. "I just don't know what I'm doing with myself," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything's been so unclear, and I don't want to drag anyone else into it." But there it was again. The hesitation, the fear of letting someone get too close. I had seen it before, in the way she would shut down when I asked too much or when the conversation turned to anything too personal. But hearing her say it out loud, hearing her admit that she was afraid to let anyone in, it stung. It made me realize just how much I had been hoping for something more from her, something deeper. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," I said, my words soft but steady. "I'm here for you, Anna. If you need to talk about it, if you need someone to listen." She shook her head, cutting me off gently. It's not that simple. You don't get it. I've spent so much time building walls around myself that I don't even know how to take them down anymore. And the worst part is, I don't even know if I want to. I've been living like this for so long, and now that someone's trying to get in, I don't know if I can let them. The weight of her words hit me hard. There was so much pain behind them, so much hurt that I hadn't seen before. And the fact that she was finally opening up about it, finally letting herself be vulnerable with me, made me realize how much I had underestimated her, how much I had wanted her to be something she wasn't, and how much I had been pushing her into a space she wasn't ready for. Anna, I said gently, my hand reaching across the table, almost instinctively. You don't have to be perfect. I don't need you to have everything figured out. I just want to be here for you, whenever you're ready. No pressure. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something that resembled hope in them. It was faint, but it was there. I don't know if I can trust you, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. Those words, I don't know if I can trust you, were like a punch to my gut. But they also made something clear. Anna wasn't the problem. The problem was the fear she had been carrying all along. Fear of opening up, fear of being vulnerable, fear of being hurt. And I realized then that what I had been seeing as distance wasn't rejection. It was self-protection. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, my voice firm but compassionate. I'm not going to push you to do anything you're not ready for. But I'm here, whenever you decide you want to talk, or even just sit in silence. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a long sip of her coffee, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the cup. I watched her, waiting, wondering if this was the moment when she would finally let go of the walls she had built around herself. But instead, she just sat there, lost in thought. I don't know how to do this, she murmured finally, her voice almost drowned out by the noise of the bustling cafe around us. I don't know how to let someone in. It feels like everything I built is crumbling, and I don't know if I can rebuild it. I could hear the desperation in her words, the ache of someone who had been holding everything in for so long that it had become unbearable. It was clear to me now that this wasn't just about me. It was about her own battles, her own fears. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't care. She was pushing me away because she didn't know how to let someone in without losing herself in the process. I think you can, I said softly. You don't have to do it all at once. It's okay to take small steps. And when you're ready, I'll be here. But only when you're ready. For the first time, I saw something shift in her eyes. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough. Enough for me to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us after all. That the silence between us wasn't a barrier we couldn't cross, but something we could learn to navigate together. I don't know what this is, Anna said, finally meeting my gaze. But I don't want to lose you. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't want to lose her either. Whatever this was, whatever it became, it was worth fighting for. The silence between us was no longer something to be afraid of. It was simply the space we needed to learn to understand each other, to learn to trust again. And as I sat there, listening to the sound of her voice, the weight of the world felt just a little bit lighter. Days passed, weeks actually, but it felt like time had slowed down between Anna and me. There were no grand declarations, no rush towards some perfect resolution, but there was something quiet, something real. It was almost as if we had begun to speak a new language, one that was far more subtle than anything either of us had ever known before. Words were still part of it, of course, but they weren't the focal point. There was a new rhythm between us, built not on expectations or assumptions, but on silence and space, on slowly learning how to exist in each other's lives without forcing anything. Our meetings had changed. The coffee shop, once the battleground where so many unsaid things hung between us, became a backdrop for moments of calm and discovery. It was as though we had both silently agreed to stop fighting against the currents of life and simply float along together. At least for now. But even in the midst of this new, unspoken understanding, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. I could feel Anna's walls, the ones she was trying to let go of, still standing, if only partially. There were moments when she would pull back into herself, retreating to a safe place where I couldn't reach her. And I understood that. She had been carrying her burden for so long that even the thought of fully trusting someone felt like a betrayal of herself. But I also knew that no matter how much we tried to pretend otherwise, we were both hurting in ways we couldn't fully express. I was tired of waiting for her to make the first move. I needed to know where we stood, what we were to each other, and whether there was any hope of breaking through the barriers that still separated us. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to say something. We were sitting together, like we always did, this time at a small table near the window in the cafe, the sun dipping low in the sky and casting an orange glow across her face. She was staring out at the street, lost in thought. I watched her for a moment, trying to gather my words, trying to find the right moment to bring up everything I had been holding inside. "Anna," I started, my voice a little unsteady. "I can't keep doing this. Waiting. I feel like we're stuck, like we're spinning in circles and nothing ever changes. I don't know what this is. I don't know if you even know what this is. But I need to know if there's something here. If there's something real, something worth fighting for." She looked at me then, and her eyes were filled with something I couldn't read. A mixture of sadness, regret, and maybe a little bit of fear. But for once, she didn't look away. She didn't retreat behind her walls. She let me see her, even if only for a moment. "I don't know what it is either," she said softly. Her voice trembled slightly, and I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing with my life, with myself. I don't know if I'm ready for this. For you?" I sat back, feeling my chest tighten at her words. It wasn't what I had hoped to hear, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was an admission, a crack in the armor she had so carefully built around herself. "I know that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But what I'm asking for isn't something that requires you to have everything figured out. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm asking you to be real with me. To let me in, even just a little. Let me show you that I'm not going anywhere. Let me show you that you don't have to do this alone." There was a long silence then, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had said too much, pushed too hard. But then she did something I hadn't expected. She reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly as she touched mine. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I don't know how to let someone in without breaking everything I've built. I've spent so long building my life this way, protecting myself, keeping everyone at arm's length, and now I'm afraid that if I let you in, I'll lose everything. I'll lose who I am." I felt a pang in my chest. It was as if the weight of her words had hit me all at once. I had known she was struggling, but I hadn't realized just how much pain she was holding inside, how deeply she feared losing herself in the process of being with someone else. "You won't lose yourself," I said softly, squeezing her hand. "You'll just learn to share that part of you. You'll learn that you don't have to do everything alone, and neither do I. I've spent so much time pretending that I didn't need anyone, but the truth is, I do. I need you, Anna. I don't want to be a part of your past or your regrets. I want to be a part of your future." She didn't say anything for a moment, and I wondered if I had gone too far, said too much. But then she gave me a small, tentative smile, the kind of smile that hinted at the possibility of something more. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she admitted quietly, her fingers still resting in mine. But I think I can try. I think I can try to let you in. The relief that flooded me in that moment was overwhelming. It wasn't the grand breakthrough I had imagined in my head. It wasn't some grand declaration of love or a promise that everything would magically work out. But it was enough. It was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. That our silence wasn't a barrier. It was the space we needed to find our way. I don't expect you to change overnight, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And I'm not asking you to have everything figured out. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere. Whenever you're ready, we'll figure this out. Together. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Together, she repeated, as if the word itself held some kind of promise. It wasn't perfect. There were still so many unanswered questions between us, so many things we hadn't yet figured out. But in that moment, I realized that maybe love wasn't about having all the answers or solving every problem. Maybe love was about showing up, even when you didn't have it all figured out. It was about being there for each other through the silence, through the uncertainty, through the pain. And as we sat there, hands intertwined, watching the world go by, I knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, whatever we had to face, we would face it together. The weeks after that evening felt like a slow unraveling of everything I had once believed about relationships, about love, and about myself. Anne and I had finally found a new rhythm, a quieter, more deliberate pace, where every touch and every word meant more than it ever had before. We were learning how to trust each other, how to bridge the gap between us, but it wasn't easy. Trust was something that didn't come easily to either of us, especially not after the years of shielding ourselves from vulnerability. But that's what made it different this time. There was no pressure. No expectation that we would suddenly become perfect. We simply took it day by day, allowing ourselves the space to grow together, no rush, no deadlines. And for once, I found myself letting go of the weight of urgency that I had carried for so long. I wasn't looking for an answer from her, or for her to fit into some perfect version of love I had imagined in my head. Instead, I was simply present, existing beside her, and trying to be the person she needed me to be. Not the person I thought I should be. We spent more time together. It wasn't every day, and it wasn't always extravagant. Sometimes, it was just a quiet walk through the park, our hands brushing against each other, or an afternoon spent curled up on her couch, watching movies in a silence that was more comforting than awkward. There were moments when the quiet felt like an invitation, as if we didn't need to speak to communicate. And in those moments, I saw Anna differently. I saw her for who she truly was. Not the guarded, withdrawn woman who had pushed me away in the beginning, but someone who was learning to soften, to trust. But there were times when the silence between us became heavy again, when something unsaid hung in the air, and I found myself wondering if the distance was creeping back into our lives. It wasn't as if she was pushing me away. No, it was more subtle than that. It was the way she would sometimes withdraw into herself, her thoughts clearly elsewhere, as if there were some part of her she wasn't willing to share. I tried not to take it personally, telling myself that it was just part of the process, part of the journey. But sometimes I couldn't help but wonder, would she ever fully let go of the walls she had built around herself? It was on one of these quieter evenings that I found myself at a crossroads. We were sitting in her apartment, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. She had been distant all evening, barely speaking, her focus entirely on the book in her hands. It wasn't like her. The Anna I had come to know was thoughtful, present. She didn't retreat like this without reason. And I knew that I couldn't ignore it any longer. "Anna," I said, my voice tentative. "What's going on? You've been so distant lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" She didn't immediately respond. Her fingers tightened around the pages of her book, her gaze fixed firmly on the text as if the words were somehow more important than the conversation we were having. It wasn't the reaction I had hoped for, but I had learned that silence was often the precursor to something deeper with Anna. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, as though she hadn't quite gathered the strength to face me. I sighed, leaning forward on the couch, trying not to let frustration color my tone. "Anna, I'm not asking you to open up if you're not ready, but I need to know what's going on inside that head of yours. I can't keep guessing." She finally looked up, and for a moment, I saw the conflict in her eyes. The same conflict I had seen that first night, the same hesitation. It was as if she was deciding whether or not she could trust me with whatever was swirling inside her. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she said quietly, and the words hit me like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, and for a second, I felt like I couldn't breathe. "Doing what?" I asked, my voice unsteady. I wasn't prepared for this, not after everything we'd worked through together. She closed the book in her hands and set it aside, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "This. Us. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I'm capable of being with someone the way you want me to be." The words fell between us, heavy and unspoken. I had hoped for something else, something softer, something that would make me feel like we were finally breaking through the walls that had held us apart for so long. But instead, I found myself staring at the reflection of my own fears in her eyes. "I thought we were doing okay," I said, my voice cracking. "I thought we were figuring it out." Bashi shook her head slowly. "We are. I think we are, but it's not enough for me. I keep thinking about the things I've been through, the things that have happened before, the people I've let in and lost. I'm not sure if I can keep opening up, if I can trust someone like I'm supposed to, and I'm afraid that if I let you in too much, I'll lose myself." It wasn't the first time she'd voiced her fear of losing herself, of giving too much to someone else. And each time she said it, it felt like a quiet plea for me to understand. But understanding didn't always make the pain of it easier to bear. I stood up and walked over to the window, my hands pressed against the cool glass. I needed space, needed to think. "Anna, I can't keep doing this either. I can't keep pretending like I'm okay with just being here, waiting for you to let me in. I need more than that. I need to know that you're willing to fight for us, too." And the silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of her eyes on me, and I knew she was wrestling with something inside her. She was torn between wanting to open up and needing to protect herself. It was the same battle she had been fighting from the very beginning. The same battle I had seen in her from the moment we first met. She stood up then, her movement slow but deliberate. "I don't know if I'm ready to fight for us. But I don't want to lose you either. I don't want to walk away from this, from you. But I don't know how to make it work. I don't know how to give you what you need when I'm still trying to figure out who I am." I turned around to face her, my heart racing. "Then we figure it out together. I don't have all the answers, Anna. I don't even know what the future looks like for us. But I do know this. But don't want to do this without you." The room fell silent once more, but this time it felt different. There was an understanding between us, a mutual acknowledgement that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but that it was worth walking together. She walked toward me, slowly, as if every step were a test, a challenge. And when she finally reached me, she reached out, her hand gently touching mine. Maybe I'm ready to try," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe I'm ready to let you in. Just a little. I don't know what it will look like, but I'll try." It wasn't the grand resolution I had hoped for. There were no fireworks, no sudden bursts of clarity. But there was something better. There was a fragile promise between us, one that said we were willing to keep going, one step at a time. And in that moment, I realized that maybe that's all love really was. Not the grand gestures or the perfect answers, but the willingness to try, even when you don't have everything figured out. It was about finding a way forward, together, even when the path seemed uncertain. The silence between us wasn't an end. It was the beginning of something new. It had been months since Anna and I had first started to unravel the layers of silence between us. It had been messy, imperfect, and, at times, overwhelmingly painful. But it had also been honest. And for once, I began to feel like we were moving in the right direction. We weren't perfect, not by any means, but we were slowly becoming more real with each other. More ourselves. But even in the midst of that growth, the distance between us still existed in some form. It wasn't the emotional wall she had once built around herself, but it was something else. Something less tangible, more insidious. It was as if we were walking around each other, circling each other, trying to figure out where we fit, where we could blend our lives into something that worked for both of us. And it wasn't just Anna anymore. It was me too. I had started to realize how much I had been holding back. I had always been the one who prided himself on being open, on sharing everything. But I had my own walls. I had my own fears, and as much as I wanted to break free of them, I wasn't sure how. But I wanted to try. I needed to try. Because I had finally come to terms with something. We were worth the effort. Anna was worth it. And no matter how much we struggled or stumbled, I was determined to make this work. It was one of those ordinary nights when everything seemed normal on the surface, but there was a tension, a quiet charge in the air. Anna had invited me over to her place again. This had become a routine for us. Dinners together, evenings spent in comfortable silence or casual conversation. But tonight felt different, more loaded, like something was just beneath the surface, waiting to come out. When I arrived, Anna greeted me at the door with a soft smile, the same one I had come to cherish over the past few months. She was dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, and her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked relaxed, but there was something about the way her eyes avoided mine that made me uneasy. She said quietly, her voice softer than usual. "Come in. Dinner's almost ready." I followed her into the kitchen, watching as she moved around the space, her movements smooth and efficient. I noticed how her shoulders were tense, how she kept glancing over her shoulder as if trying to gauge my reaction to something. "Is everything okay?" I asked, my voice laced with concern. I wasn't sure why, but I could feel the undercurrent of tension in the room. It was as if there was something she wasn't saying. She paused for a moment, her back still turned to me. I could hear her exhale slowly before she finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, about where we're headed. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been distant." I had noticed. Of course I had. But I hadn't wanted to bring it up. I had thought it was just a phase, maybe a temporary step back as she worked through her own things. But now that she had said it out loud, I realized how much I had been ignoring it. "You don't have to apologize," I said, stepping closer to her. "I understand. We've both been through a lot, and sometimes it's hard to keep moving forward when you're not sure of where you're going." She turned to face me then, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, something more vulnerable than I had seen in weeks. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Scared of what this is. Scared of where it could go. And I think I'm scared of losing myself again. I don't know if I can do this." I felt a pang in my chest. We had been here before, hadn't we? She had voiced these same fears in the past, but this time it felt different. It felt more urgent, more real. And I realized that despite all the progress we had made, despite how close we had come to truly connecting, we were still standing at the edge of something we weren't sure we could cross. I stepped closer, my hand reaching out to gently touch hers. "Anna," I said softly, "you don't have to lose yourself. I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I just want you to be with me. To let me in, piece by piece. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes searched mine, looking for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe the same certainty that I was starting to feel in my chest. But it wasn't easy. It never had been with Anna. She had always been the type to hold things back, to protect herself even when she didn't realize she was doing it. "I want to believe you," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can let myself love you the way I want to." I closed the gap between us, gently lifting her chin so that she would look me in the eyes. "You don't have to love me the way you think you should. You just have to love me the way you can, and that's enough for me." She didn't say anything for a long moment, and in that silence, I could feel everything shifting. I could feel the weight of the years she had spent guarding herself, of the walls she had built up over time. But I could also feel the desire for something more. Something real, something lasting. "Okay," she said quietly, finally meeting my gaze. "I'll try. I'll try to let you in. I'll try to let go of the fear." But the weight that lifted from my chest was immense. It wasn't a perfect answer, and it wasn't a solution to all of our problems. But it was enough. It was a step forward, a promise, however small, that we could make this work. Together, we sat down at the dinner table, the tension between us slowly beginning to dissipate as we began to talk, to laugh, to share. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. But it was real. We were beginning to see each other for who we truly were, and in that quiet, imperfect space, we were finally learning to be ourselves together. Later that evening, as we sat on her couch, our bodies close but not quite touching, I realized something. Relationships weren't about having all the answers. They weren't about perfect timing or flawless execution. Relationships were about showing up, about being there for each other even when the path wasn't clear. It was about accepting the silence, the distance, and everything in between, and still choosing to move forward one step at a time. And as I looked at Anna, sitting beside me, I knew that despite everything, despite the uncertainty, despite the fear, this was a road I was willing to walk, one step at a time. With her, it said that time heals all wounds. But in our case, I've come to learn that time didn't so much heal as it gave us the space to grow into something we weren't quite sure we were ready for. Every day with Anna became a new lesson, a lesson in patience, understanding, and, most importantly, letting go. The distance that had once threatened to tear us apart had transformed into something entirely different. Something that, in its own way, connected us more deeply than anything I had ever expected. It was the quiet moments, the days when nothing remarkable happened, that taught me the most. The months since we had made that fragile decision to give each other a chance had not been without challenges. We were still learning how to coexist, how to share our fears and hopes without suffocating one another. Anna was still haunted by her past, and I, too, had my own ghosts. But somehow, despite all the difficulties, we were no longer standing at the edge. We had crossed it. Not in a dramatic leap, but in slow, deliberate steps. One of the biggest changes had been in how we communicated. There were still times when the silence between us felt like an uncomfortable weight, a reminder of all the things we had yet to say. But the silence no longer scared me. It had become something I could sit with, something we could share without feeling the need to fill every gap with words. In those moments, we had learned how to just be, to exist alongside each other in a way that was peaceful, even when we didn't have the answers. That night, however, felt different. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken that neither of us could ignore. I had been feeling it for days now, an unshakable feeling that something was about to change. It wasn't that I was afraid of change. No, I had come to accept that everything we had been through was part of a larger process. But still, there was a part of me that didn't want to confront it. A part of me that wanted to stay in this comfortable space where we could pretend everything was perfect, even when it wasn't. Anna invited me over to her apartment for dinner, something we had done countless times before. As I walked in, The familiar scent of her cooking greeted me, but there was something else in the air, a certain quietness that I couldn't quite place. "Hey," I said as I entered, taking off my jacket and hanging it up by the door. She was in the kitchen, but there was something about her posture that made me uneasy. She wasn't moving like she usually did. There was no rush, no casual humming to herself as she chopped vegetables or stirred the pot. Instead, she stood still, her back to me, as if lost in thought. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice tentative as I approached her. She turned to face me then, and for a moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. A deep sadness in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of sadness that was visible to everyone, but it was the kind I had learned to recognize, the kind that only I had the privilege of seeing. The kind that, for some reason, she only allowed me to witness. "Yeah, everything's fine," she said, but I could hear the catch in her voice. It was clear that there was more to her silence than she was letting on. I moved closer to her, my hand instinctively reaching out to touch hers. "Anna, talk to me. What's going on?" She looked at me for a long moment, as if weighing something heavy in her mind. Finally, she sighed and let out a soft laugh, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't know what's going on, honestly. It's just, I'm scared." I felt my chest tighten. "Scared of what?" "Of losing this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of losing you. Of getting too close and falling apart again. I keep thinking about the things I've been through, the mistakes I've made, and I'm afraid that if I let myself go too far, I'll lose everything. I'll lose myself again." But her words were a mirror to everything I had been feeling, though I hadn't realized it until now. We had both been holding on so tightly to the fear of what could go wrong that we hadn't fully embraced what was right between us. We had been so focused on our pasts that we hadn't given ourselves the chance to fully experience our present. The weight of her admission hit me hard, and I realized that we had been circling the same problem for so long that it had become a part of us. "Anna," I said softly, pulling her into a hug. "You're not going to lose yourself. Not with me. We're not perfect. We don't have all the answers. But we have this. We have each other. And that's enough. That's all I need." She clung to me, her head resting on my shoulder as her hands gripped my shirt tightly. I felt the tremors in her body, the depth of the emotion she was trying to keep hidden. "I don't know if I can believe that," she whispered. "I don't know if I can believe that I won't lose everything again." I pulled back slightly, just enough to look her in the eyes. "I won't let you lose anything, Anna. But you have to trust me. You have to trust us." Her gaze softened, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I want to," she said quietly, the words laced with both fear and longing. "I really want to." I nodded, my thumb gently brushing the side of her face. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." And that was the moment. The moment when I knew that this, whatever it was between us, wasn't about having all the answers or figuring out a perfect path. It was about learning how to navigate the uncertainty, how to stand by each other even when we didn't know what the future held. We didn't need to fix everything. We didn't need to be perfect. We just needed to be real. We spent the rest of the evening together, the weight of our earlier conversation still hanging between us, but there was a new sense of clarity. We ate dinner in relative silence, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Afterward, we sat on the couch, our legs tangled together as we watched the rain pour down outside the window. It was one of those nights where time seemed to stand still, and all that mattered was the space we shared. Quiet, simple, but full of understanding. As the night wore on, I realized that the silence between us was no longer something to fear. It was something we had come to embrace. In that silence, we had found each other. And in that silence, we would continue to grow together, step by step, no matter what came next. The silence, once so heavy, had transformed into a space of connection. A place where we could simply be ourselves, No walls, no pretensions. Just two people figuring out how to live alongside each other in a world that didn't always make sense. And that, I realized, was enough. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.